Welcome, everybody. This is our second installment of our email marketing makeover. I'm very excited for this one. I think this is probably the beginning of a lot of the meat a lot of you are looking for. I think our part one, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to be sending out soon. It downloaded in a strange place and we're still recovering it. So it will be there. I've been reassured. So as soon as I get that, I'll be sending it out. But that was great. We have to have a good base. We have to be segmented correctly. You have to be sending the message to the right people. And today we're going to learn about what it should look like, how we should design it. I'm really excited. For those of you who don't know, CC Dadisman is a arts and nonprofit marketing consultant. She's worked for a bunch of different arts organizations. She's done her own consultancy. She now works for a consultancy in Ohio. We've known each other for years, and I trust her implicitly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Cece, and we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Joe, for the introduction. Currently, I work at an agency called Form, and what we do is we work with arts and culture organizations and nonprofits. And what I do is I do pretty much everything digital. So I am doing email marketing daily for a variety of different clients. And the things that we're going to talk about today are sort of a mix of best practices, industry-wide best practices, but also things that I have learned from sending, thousands of campaigns specifically for arts organizations. So let's get started so that we have enough time to get through everything today. Just like Joe mentioned, in the first webinar, we talked about how to segment your list and how to determine which groups are going to get which messages. I want to reiterate that that really is the most important foundation. We're going to talk a lot about design today. You could have the most beautifully designed email in the history of email, but if the contents of it is not relevant to the people you're sending it to, it's not going to have the result that you're looking for. I know the design part of this is the more sexy topic when we talk about email, but that segmentation portion is really, really important, and it is absolutely necessary as a foundation. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is, simply how do we get people to sign up for the list? Because there is a little bit of a method here. There is a little bit of design that's involved in this. And this is really the first step before you send out an email, is how do we get people to sign up for our emails? In general, I recommend that you have a sign up form on your website on every page, if possible. Certainly on your most popular pages, the pages that are visited the most, the pages that might be connected to your various events or programs, pages where people who are interested in those particular programs would be looking at, so that right when they're looking at those programs, they see the sign up and it prompts them to find out more information about those programs. This is an example here from an organization up here, the Great Lakes Science Center. And you can see that at the top of their website, they have a little bar, and this is on every page of their website, to subscribe to their emails. This is a good tactic because it's there all the time. So if at any point when somebody is on their website and they feel like they want to receive more information, they can do that. The important thing to remember is that we want to make it easy for people to really do anything, right? And we'll talk more about that when it comes to design. But this encompasses also allowing people to sign up for your newsletter. I hear a lot from organizations that, how do we build our list? How do we grow our list? How do we get more people to sign up? It's really as simple as making it as easy as possible and putting it out there. I'll give you another example that is a little bit more tactical. This is something that I did many years ago. You can see the date there. It's 2015, 2016. But I still love this example, and it worked so well. So a lot of us, if we're selling tickets to events and programs, we have a time where we've announced the program, we've announced the performance, but single tickets may not be on sale yet. The subscriptions may be on sale, but the single tickets may not be on sale. Or if you're working with memberships, perhaps you have a certain cohort of members where they can renew early and get some sort of discount or other perk, and then after that you have everybody else get a membership. So what we did at Palm Beach Opera is on the show pages. So this was on a specific opera page. You can see on the right, it was Carmen. We were taking subscriptions. So obviously on that show landing page on the website, we were directing people to subscribe. But certainly not everyone is going to become a subscriber, right? Some people were just interested in single tickets. So we put this little bit of text below that let people know when single tickets were going to be on sale, which I think is just important generally to have on these landing pages. But then we also provided a little link that said, would you like us to contact you when they go on sale? And that little link went to this very simple form. Of course, technology has advanced, the forms that you can now make right now are much prettier. But at the time, this was the form that we made. And people filled out this form and said what they were interested in. And this would be sent to our box office, and they kept all of those form submissions. It was in an Excel spreadsheet. And when single tickets went on sale, not only did we email this group of people, but for some of them, we also called them to let them know that tickets were on sale, especially if they didn't give an email and they only gave a phone. This little form, this tactic on the website garnered us about 200 leads. Some of these people were people that were already on our list, which was fine because at least we knew what they were interested in. So hearkening back to the first webinar about segmentation, I had a built-in segment because I knew whoever clicked that they were interested in Carmen, that I could put them in that segment, in that bucket, and send them information about Carmen. So this very, very simple little tactic got us a lot of information and some new email addresses as well. And this is very simple, and everyone here can do this. I would ask that you try to think about what your organization offers and see if you can prompt people to give you their email address for a specific purpose. Of course, when you use that email address, let it be for that purpose, right? We're using email for the, for the forces of good here, right? Don't just start, sending them every single email that goes out. But this is something simple like this is a great way to increase your list, as well as getting more information about the people on the list. At a very basic level, with getting email addresses and getting signups, it's all about asking people, right? Sometimes we think, well, our people don't have email. I would be willing to bet that most of them do. It's just that we're not asking. So don't forget to ask. When somebody calls in to sign up for a program or to buy a ticket, make sure you're asking for their email. Just like with the previous example, we're asking for their email for a specific purpose. So don't forget to just be very simple about it and ask. All right. So now we're going to get into the actual best practices for creating an email, for designing an email. This, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, this deck will be made available via link, but please feel free to screenshot anything that you'd like. Nothing in here is proprietary or copyrighted, so you're more than welcome to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to send out the link to the slide deck as well as the video
Awesome.
of the webinars. And everyone, I didn't
Great.
mention earlier, we kind of talked about it quickly. If you have any questions, you're welcome to use the chat box during the presentation, but we will have a Q&A and a discussion at the end. So if there's anything that you need some clarity on, that's no problem. And Cece, if you want to take any time to stop in between, it's up to you.
Okay, fantastic. Oh yes, and I just remembered that this is being recorded. So my voice in its current state is going to be recorded for posterity.
Absolutely.
That's great. Okay, so for design best practices, so these are the elements. that your email should have, every one of your emails should have at a most basic level. The first one is you have to pay attention to your subject line, and we'll go through a whole section about subject lines in a second. But your subject line is so important, because if you don't have a good subject line, people are probably not going to open that email. They're just going to delete it, and they're not even going to see the content that you spent so much time creating to make it be so beautiful, right? So the subject line is the thing that you need to think about first, and making sure that the subject line is indicative of what is in the email is very important to remember. The reason why I say this is because sometimes we like to name our emails, like the insider or the overture or something like that. For a certain group of people, a certain segment of people, your most highly engaged people, that's going to make sense to them, right? And they might even be looking for that because they know that that particular email contains certain information that they're interested in. However, other people on your list may not know what that means. And what is contained in the email may be a lot more compelling than just the name of the email. So make sure that your subject line says something about what's in the email. The second thing is always make sure to have compelling images that are large enough and clear enough, high quality photos for people to see what's in the photo. And also the images, of course, need to match whatever segment you're sending it to, in addition to matching the content, so that immediately people will be drawn in by the image. Usually I say to put an image near the top of the email so that when somebody opens the email, they're seeing something visual right away. Part of this is just because, that's going to grab someone's attention, right? But the other part of that is, as human beings, we react to images and photos faster than text. Of course, it's a matter of seconds. And you probably can know this from your own personal experience. For example, when you're on your phone and you're scrolling through Facebook, most times, if you see some sort of image that's compelling to you, you're going to stop because you saw that image, and then you're going to go up and look at what the text is in the body of the post, right? This is that concept. So making sure that there's a compelling image near the top of the email is very important. The third thing is to have concise body text. Concise. For me, that means 1, maybe 2 short paragraphs of body text. The reason why is because, number one, we know that people scan when they read. So we don't want to have, a War and Peace length article in the email because we know that they're going to scan. The second reason for that is because the purpose of an email, of this kind of email, is not to give people complete information, not to give them every single bit of wording about a particular show or program. It's to give them just enough so that they will go over to your website to find more information, right? Email is a traffic generator over to your website. So you want to give just enough so that you've piqued their interest, so that they click on your call to action, which is number 4. Always make sure that you have a clear call to action in your emails. I like to use a button because all the data shows that if you've got a button, that's just easier for people to see. Right? People need to be guided as to what to do next when they're seeing your email, right? People are not going to infer. Well, a certain group of people might, but most people are not going to infer. So we need to guide them. We need to say, this is where you can find more information. This is what we want you to do next. So having a prominent call to action is very important. The 5th thing is list segmentation, which we talked about in the previous webinar, right? This is very important because it's going to guide and dictate the content and your calls to action and your images, right? And your subject lines. For each individual segment of people that are receiving this email, different things are going to be interesting and compelling to them. So the segmentation that you have working is going to guide everything else on this list here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about sort of in detail is subject lines, right? And as I mentioned, your subject line, it might just be your most important part of the email, because that's going to dictate whether somebody opens that email or whether they just delete it out of their inbox. So I have some data here because I like data. So subject lines that are shorter receive more opens than ones that are longer. Obviously, there's probably a few reasons for this. One of which is that we take it's a matter of milliseconds when we look at our inbox and we look at that subject line and determine whether or not it's relevant to us, right? So a shorter subject line is going to allow us to hopefully read the entire thing so that we can make that determination. Another reason is sort of purely tactical, in that when we send out an email, we don't know exactly what email program somebody is going to be opening it on, right? And also, we don't know how their program is set up. They could be opening it on a phone, on an iPad, in Outlook. They could have a reading pane set up. They could not have a reading pane set up. All of those different things are going to cut off the subject line in a slightly different way. Sure, you could make an email and you could run it through Litmus, which is an email testing program that'll show you how it looks in all these various programs. But you know what? When we're making emails, we don't have time to do that. So it's best to just err on the shorter side with subject lines. If you are not able to make a subject line that's super concise, try to make sure that all the important stuff is towards the front and towards the beginning of the subject line, so that even if it does get cut off, people will still get the gist and what is going to be compelling and relevant to that particular segment. They'll be able to see that right from the beginning. Also, the use of personalization in a subject line increases open rates as well. If you're using a program like Constant Contact, MailChimp, Emma, any of these allow you to personalize the subject line with a little merge field, right? You may have used merge fields in the actual emails, but you can also use these merge fields in the subject. Some emails where this is very powerful is emails where you really are talking to an individual person, a subscription renewal, a donation, talking to somebody who is a lapsed subscriber. Adding those adding the personalization in those merge fields can be very helpful. Mr. Smith, we miss you. Please renew your subscription. Right? That person on the other end knows that this is really for them specifically. And again, creating a great subject line means thinking about what the email is about and not what it's called. Now, I should say, before we move further, that all of these things I talk about are based on best practices and my experience. If you have something that you have been doing with email that is working well, you don't need to change it, right? You don't rock the boat. If you are sending out a newsletter or a digest email to a particular segment, and you're getting a 60 or 70% open rate, and the subject line is the name of the email, by all means, continue to do that. If you want to if you want to try out one of the changes that I talk about in this webinar, please do that as an A/B test, right? So that you don't have an email, that just tanks in terms of opens because you're trying something different. A/B testing will help you determine what's going to work. And all of the major email platforms, they all have an easy way to A/B test things like a subject line. So I would recommend doing that if you want to implement something that I talk about that's different than what you're already doing. All right, now let's go to the actual design and the actual layout of the email. This is the F pattern. I would invite you to look at this closely. This is what's called a heat map. And what heat maps are is they track eye movements. So they track where people are looking when they're looking at really anything. The F pattern is applicable for, this is showing websites, right? It's also applicable for emails, for anything where there's text, brochures, appeal letters, for those of you on the webinar who also wear a fundraising hat. This is how people read. You can see that the most eyes, right, that the most important piece of real estate really is at the top, at the left, right? In English, we read from left to right, from top to bottom. So this makes sense. So we can see here that people are starting at the top left and they're reading over pretty much all the way over at the top. And then they kind of scan a little bit. And then maybe they kind of read over a little bit more. And then they kind of scan down and then they're done, right? Most people are not making it to the bottom of whatever the text is. And you can also see here that on the left, that's a fair amount of body text, right? It's smaller body text and it's in one big chunk. I know we're talking about emails here, but I don't want to be remiss and not talk about how this might apply to your website. So if you have pages on your website, and I'd be willing to bet that you do, I'm looking at you About Us pages, that you've got pages that have large amounts of body text. This is how people are reading them. They're probably not seeing all of that text. How do we make our emails and our website and our appeal letters more reading friendly so that we can hopefully get people further down and get them to actually consume the information that we're sending them? One of the easiest things to do is to break up your body text with headings or even images in an email, because those are anchors to our eye. When we read an email or read a page on a website, usually our eye is going to skip from heading to heading to heading to determine if what comes after that heading, if what's in that section is relevant to us. So the next time you make an email, or when you're updating your website, or when you're writing that copy for your season brochure, have this heat map in your mind. It's better that we accept that this is how people read, rather than trying to, think that people are miraculously going to read in a different way just because they're reading our content, right? This is how people are going to consume that content. So let's all be at peace with that. I have here a few emails that I think are good as far as design, so I wanted to share them with you. This first one is from the Cooper Hewitt, and this is clearly about a lecture. It's trying to get people to register for this lecture. You can see at the top that there's a headline that has the name of the lecture, and it has the date and the location. And then right under that, near the top of the email, they have an image that they have deemed will be compelling to the group of people that they're sending this email to. Right below that, they have where the event is, when it is, and they've got a big call to action button right there. You know exactly what they want you to do next. And then below that, they've got a little bit of body text. There's really only one more line more of body text, so it's concise. The only thing that I would change in this email actually is that the body text is a little small. Current best practice for body text size for emails and for websites is 16 to 18 point. Now, that's 16 to 18 point in web font sizes, not in print. So don't go into your, in your next appeal letter or Word document and think that you have to do 18 point in a Word document. This is just 18 point on the web. 16 is generally the smallest, but I tend to go with 18 now. And that's not just to cater to, older demographics. It's also for younger demographics. Slightly larger text is easier to read. And we just learned that people scan. And if the text is larger, it makes us easier to scan more text. So having slightly larger text is the way to go. Also, another thing that you'll notice in all of the email examples is that the text itself, or most of the text, is on a white background. This one, some of it is on a very, very, very light gray, but a white background is going to be the way to go in an email. Also, on your website. Not only is it just plain old easier to read, dark text on a white background, but also this is going to automatically adhere to a lot of the accessibility standards. So I don't know if you're familiar, but there is something called the WCAG standards that are for web and email that are to make sure that people with low vision are able to read the content. These standards are becoming more and more important to implement, and there actually have already been some lawsuits brought by people to large companies. Target was one of them. There was recently a huge lawsuit that was brought against a number of colleges and universities because their websites and their communications did not adhere to these standards. I do not know of one being brought yet against a nonprofit organization, but we need to be ahead of the curve. And I feel that very, very soon, if you receive any sort of federal, state, or local government grant money, that it is going to be a requirement that your website and your emails and your communications adhere to these standards, right? There's already talk about that. It's not being enforced right now, but it will be. So start thinking about it. So, and this is something that's really easy to do. Just making sure that your emails are on a white background. Here's another one from Pacific Northwest Ballet, right? You can see at the top, they've got these gorgeous photos. Oh my gosh, dance companies, you're so lucky because dance companies always have these beautiful photos of dancers. So they've got these photos and they've arranged them in a grid, which I think is really clever. Usually I say, have one image near the top of the email. They have 4 images, but they've created a grid with those images, so it functions sort of as one image. They also have headline text here that makes it very clear that this is, they have this deal, no fees when you buy tickets for this particular performance. Then they have very concise body text, right? Just a couple sentences. They have the date information, right? And then they actually have 2 calls to action, which I also think is very clever. Usually I'll say 1 call to action, but here I think this works. So they have the button on the right, the more information button, is going to take people over to their website to find out more, right? To view that landing page. So if somebody is so interested to learn more about these particular ballets, to learn more about the cast, this kind of thing, they can click on that one. And then the one on the left is if people know right away that they just want to go and buy tickets, and that goes immediately to their ticketing program. So if this email was enough for that particular person, they say, oh, I'm sold. They can just go to right away to buy tickets. Another reason why I like this email is because clearly this is what I call a one-off email, right? It has one feature in it. It's clearly about this offer for this particular mixed rep performance. But down below, they have these other little features that are related, which I think is a great way to add additional content without adding too much bulk, right? Without adding too much more text. So clearly they've got a trailer, right? A video trailer for this show, a photo gallery, great. And then also they've got a link to a media appearance that they did leading up to this particular performance. Very good way to add in some additional information. Another way that you might be able to use something like this is you might be able to tag on some other events or programs that might also be interesting to the people you're sending this email to. So let's say PNB, this is a mixed rep show with Apollo and Carmina Burana. Let's say they had another show coming up that also was a mixed repertoire show with kind of a similar vibe. Very easily, they could tag at the bottom something small that they were having that particular show coming up that these folks might be interested in. That's a great way to be able to increase the amount of information, but still keeping the main attention, the main focus on the thing that you're currently trying to sell. All right, here's another one. This is a client of ours here at Form, and this is their template for their email newsletter, which I'll stop and say, I do not like the term newsletter when talking about emails, because a newsletter just by default is something that has full-length articles, right? If you do a print newsletter, you're probably printing it on 11 by 17 pieces of paper, and you're binding it in the middle, and you're folding that over to 8.5 by 11, then you're folding it over again, you're wafer sealing it, and you're sticking it in the mail, right? It's got full articles in it, photos, it reads kind of like a newspaper or a magazine. An email, as we talked about before, an email should not have full articles in it, right? It should have just enough to get people enticed so that they click over to your website for more. So instead of calling them email newsletters, I prefer to call them digest emails, because really the function for those quote unquote email newsletters are to share multiple upcoming programs, events, news item, things that are going to be pertinent. So with a digest email, generally my rules are no more than 4 features, right? I know some people might be like, oh my gosh, only 4. How are we going to do that? Hang tight. We'll talk about it. Only 4 features, 1 main feature at the top, right? The most important thing that you want people to read in that email, because we have to be at peace with the fact that whatever is the top item is probably going to get the most eyes and probably going to get the most engagement, the most clicks to that call to action button. So putting the most important thing at the top is very important. And then underneath of that, have 3 additional features. I like to do them all with an image of some sort that relates to that particular content, also with their own call to action button. You'll notice in this particular template that the images, they're a thumbnail, so they're smaller, but they're still pretty big. Let's all agree to stop using teeny tiny little thumbnails in our emails. It's not worth putting a photo in an email if people can't clearly see what that photo is, right? So making sure that they're a little bit bigger is going to be very helpful. You'll also notice that each section has a heading, because as we talked about in the F pattern, the headings are going to be what your eye jumps to, to help guide you down the page. So making sure that each feature has its own heading is going to be very important for those who are just scrolling and scanning. They're going to look at those headings to determine whether or not they want to delve down and read more about that feature. Now you'll notice I said before about how you want to have your text on a white background, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't integrate your colors in the email. So you can see here, this is Oberlin Center for the Arts. You can see in their logo, their color is this orange. So all the text is on white, but we added an orange background so that we're still adhering to that branding, to their branding, livening the email up a little bit so it doesn't have to be super boring all on white, right? But the text is still on white. Another thing to make sure is that when you're designing your email, since we're talking about branding and colors, is making sure that your email adheres to your branding, that it matches your fonts, your colors, any styles that might be used. And I'll give you an example here in this particular email. If you went to artsoberlin.org, their website, you would see the same colors, the same fonts that are in this email. You will also see the same style call to action buttons. They use this call to action button that's not a color, but it's just a border around the button. So styling your emails so that it's in keeping with your brand is very important, so that there is that brand recognition. When somebody opens this email, they know that it's from you, that it's legit, right? And then when they go over to your website, which we hope that they will after clicking on all of your CTA buttons, that it's a seamless visual experience. You'll also notice in this email too, because it is a digest email, that we are using little dividers here so that we can separate the content. But it's not in a really obtrusive way. It's not taking up a lot of space, but it's still clearly denoting what is a feature in this digest email. So making sure that you've got clear delineations between your content is something that you want to go for. Here is another digest email. This is a place in Australia, and they have a variety of things that they do. They have exhibits. You can go camping. You can do programs for children and adults. And so they have all these things in a digest email. The reason why I like this layout is because clearly you can see they have this main feature at the top with really, just 2 sentences there, a clear call to action button. You know that in this particular email, the Shipyard Stories exhibition is the thing that they have deemed the most important. And then below that, they've got these features. And you can see that they have a large photo. This photo here, it's half of the email, even larger than the previous one, which I did. They've got clear call to action buttons. They've got a little bit of body text, a little bit of a headline in bolded text. So you can see how clean this looks. Also, the text is on a white background, right? And this is all in keeping with the brand that they've established. Now that we've looked at all of these different examples, I'd like to talk a little bit about using columns in emails. Generally, the best practice is always to have a full width email. Let's go back to this one. You'll notice this is full width. This is not divided up into 2 columns with content. Yes, there are some columns technically in use where the CTA button is, and then where the information, the where and when, right? But the email itself is 1 column. The same for this. The email itself is full width. The reason why you want to do this is because you want to allow people to just read all the way across, which is our natural tendency. Also, we know that most people are going to interact with an email on a mobile device. When you have two columns, your email set up as two columns, when it goes on a mobile device, it's going to arrange those columns vertically. So one of the columns is going to be moved down to underneath of another column. So if you're setting up an email and you've got two columns in it, and you're intending that what's at the top of both of those columns are the two important things, you have to know that the top of that second column is probably going to be put down at the bottom. So it's not going to be seen in the way that you intended. Bringing up mobile. Make sure that your email is responsive. So meaning that it is easily viewed, it looks the same on a mobile device as it does on a desktop. Now, MailChimp will allow you to test that right when you're building the email. When you do a preview, there's a little button that you can view it on a mobile device. And in fact, if you're using MailChimp, all of MailChimp's templates are responsive. If you're using Constant Contact, and I bring this up because I know that there's a few people on here that do, Constant Contact still has some older templates that they will still let you use. So if you've been using a template, the same template for the past, 4 or 5 years, it may be a template that is not mobile friendly. So you want to check on that to make sure that the email is responsive. All right. I want to give a few resources here. The first resource is Canva. There's probably people joining us today that are familiar with Canva and use Canva. So Canva is free. They do have a paid version, but usually, I just use the free one. So what Canva will allow you to do is it will allow you to make graphics for your emails. So remember that Pacific Northwest Ballet email that had the grid, the 4 images in a grid at the top? Canva is a tool that will easily allow you to do that yourself. You don't have to know Photoshop to do that. You don't have to have Photoshop. You can use Canva to do that. You can also do things like overlay text on an image, or maybe even put a copyright at the bottom of the image, or a photo credit, something like that. It's a very, very useful tool. You can also use it to create images for social media. It already has all of the image sizes for social media loaded in, so it makes it very easy to create those as well. The next resource is the Google Campaign URL Builder. Now, for those of you who are tech nerds like I am, this is not the Google URL shortener, which was sunsetted. This is the URL Builder. And what this builder will allow you to do is it will allow you to create a custom URL that will denote exactly where the traffic is coming from over to your Google Analytics. And I'll stop and say, I can't see you, so I'm not going to ask anyone to raise hands, even though this is a safe space. If you are not looking at your Google Analytics regularly, let that be one of the first things that you do after getting off of this webinar. If you're not sure if you have Google Analytics installed on your website, contact your web person, whoever manages that website, and ask them. If it's not installed, please have them install it immediately. It's free. It's going to allow you to see how people are using your website and also where the traffic is coming from to your website. It is an invaluable tool. It can help you make really important decisions about the content on your website. And also, it can allow you to look at where traffic is coming from so that you know which channels are working best. And also, it will allow you to make sure that people are seeing the content that you want them to see after they've come over to your website. Now, in talking about email, if you're using Constant Contact or MailChimp, there is an integration for Google Analytics that's built in. You just need to set it up and connect your Google Analytics account over to your MailChimp. I'm not going to go into exactly how to do that on each platform, but you can go to the support documents for whichever software you use for email. And I'm sure that you just search it in the support documents, and they will have something in there showing you how to do it. When you have it integrated, when you send out an email, it will allow you to put in the little a little tag that says, this email is the March Digest email. And it'll show that traffic when it comes into Google Analytics as one of the traffic sources. It'll say March Digest email. Then when you're looking at that GA data, you're able to see, where did those people go when they went to the website? How long were they on the website? Were they new to the website? Did they only view one page and then leave? Did they view the page you sent them to and continue? All of these things are very important. I'll give you a very quick anecdote about why looking at your where your traffic is coming from on your website is so important. Currently, I'm working with a client that was spending thousands of dollars with their county's CVB because they had a program where they would list your organization on the CVB website, promising to drive traffic over to the organization's website. They were paying, and they had been paying for many years, to have this listing on the website. Of course, they're making their budget for their next fiscal. They're kind of working that out. And they were going through and saying, okay, are these things working? So they came to me and they said, can you look in our Google Analytics and see how much traffic is coming from the CVB website? So we went back and we looked at 3 years worth of data. In 3 years, 72 people went to their website from the CVB's website. Only 72. And they were spending thousands of dollars on this over the course of time. So immediately, that let them know that that is not a good use of that money, and that money could be put somewhere else. So this is why it's so important to look at your Google Analytics and to make sure that you're tracking these things. And this is where that URL builder comes in. Excuse me. We covered this a little bit in the previous webinar, but I want to go over it again. Now that we've talked about design and we've talked about what content might be interesting to various groups of people, I want to review it and remind everyone that not everyone should receive every one of these emails that goes out. Specifically, we just talked a lot about digest emails. Your digest email is the one email that probably currently goes to everyone on your list, or almost everyone on your list. It actually should be the opposite. The digest email should only go to your most highly engaged people, because they're the ones who will want to know all of that stuff that's in the email. So when we looked at those digest emails previously, there were various features about different programs. Someone who is highly engaged with your organization, someone who knows you, they're going to want to know about all of these different programs. They're going to want to see and read that volunteer spotlight that you've put in there, right? The rest of the people on your list, odds are you're going to have them segmented by their interest, by their past buying history, right? So they're going to be the most interested in probably very targeted one-off emails. For example, the PNB email that went out about Apollo and Carmina. The people who are going to be very interested in that are people who have maybe attended similar ballets in the past. That's what's going to give you that higher open rate, is this relevance that we talked about last time. If your digest email has an open rate of 25% or less, that is your clue to say, you know what, I really need to call this down. because it's only 25% of people on that list that want to hear all this information. So those are the 25% that should be getting that digest email. The rest you should look carefully at and segment out and say, well, what should I be sending to them via email? Because it's not the digest email, because they're not opening it. It makes us feel really good to send out an email to our entire list. But if only 20% are opening it, it doesn't matter that it's gone to 10,000 people. Only 20% are even seeing that email. And again, with the email content and design, in order for the design of that email to be effective, it has to be this combination of the messaging in the email that's making sure that it's compelling to the people you're targeting, and also making sure that with those CTAs in the email, that those are going to be achieving your outcomes that you've established. And I hope that after the first webinar, that you went back and you established some outcomes for your emails that are coming in the future. So if your desired outcome is to sell tickets to Apollo and Carmina, to your mixed rep show, then obviously that CTA button should be directly related to that. Maybe it says buy tickets. Maybe it says something like find out more. Maybe it says something like view seating availability. Whatever is going to be the most compelling on that CTA button for that targeting group that's going to make them click and take the next step. When it comes to messaging, again, I want to reiterate this. Whatever segment you're talking to, you've only got those couple of sentences in the body text that we just talked about. Make sure that those couple of sentences are easy to read for the group that you're sending the email to and doesn't have any jargon in it, so that they'll be able to read it, take in that information, and that's what's going to lead them to click on your CTA button to find out more. And one more time, I will show this. Last time we talked a lot about creating a plan, and this directly relates to your one-off emails that we talked about in this webinar, your digest emails. When will those go out? What are the priorities for those emails? What are the major outcomes? So creating this plan also is directly related back to how those emails are going to look and what those emails are going to say. And as always, the messaging has to match the recipient. When we're sending out these emails, making sure, we talked about subject lines, making sure that that subject line is going to be relevant and compelling to the target group that is receiving that email. Making sure that that image that you're putting at the top of the email is going to be compelling to the group that is going to be receiving it. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a children's performance coming up and you're sending the email to people who you have identified as having children on your list. Probably a compelling image is going to be showing a photo of children at the show, enjoying the show, smiling, right? Maybe with their parents, right? Because probably most of the people in that segment are going to be the parents or the grandparents, perhaps. Showing that image at the top is what's going to really bring in that particular targeting group. The body text, the headlines in the body text there are also going to change depending on the targeting group. For, thinking about what is going to be interesting to those parents about that kids show. One thing that you'd probably want to have in your body text is something about the age group that this show is appropriate for, things like that. So when we think about design, we always have to first start off with who the message is going to. We need to make sure that the design is clean, it's very easy to read, that the text is concise so that it can be read quickly, that the subject line is compelling, so that at a very basic level, people are going to open the email, and that the CTA button that you have directly relates to your desired outcome for that email, and that CTA button is prominent, and that it really leads people over to your website so that you can get them on your real estate to continue. Okay. In this particular iteration of this webinar, I've left a lot of time for questions because I always find that I get the most questions about this particular topic. So Joe, do we want to move over to the questions?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Let me see here. I do this.
They're a little cheaper, but I really want to.
Okay, everybody, you've all been unmuted, just so you know. No longer muted. You're welcome to remute yourself. If you have any questions about this, I know there are a lot and we went through a lot. Please don't be shy and please be specific. I think, there are no bad questions, only unanswered ones.
Yeah, exactly. This is a safe space. There are no stupid questions. If you have a particular question, even if you think it might be very basic, odds are somebody else has the same question.
I have a question. You're talking about tiny thumbnails and moving away from those. What are specs that you'd recommend?
Rather than specs, because every email platform has sizes built in, and I'm a firm believer in simply using those sizes because it's easier. Constant Contact, I think they have like small, medium, large, something like that. MailChimp will, depending on how you have it set up, it'll let you choose like half or 2/3 or a third or a quarter, I think. I would just err on the side of making the image large enough that it's easy to see what's in that image. In a couple of these, I'll go back to these examples here. So this one, this is done in MailChimp. So this is, I think, 2/3, 1/3. And it automatically sizes the image to be what 1/3 is for them. This one, I don't know what they made this in, but you can see it's clearly a half. Mm-hmm. I think we got into the habit of making these teeny tiny thumbnails because we were having so much accompanying text that we wanted to make the image smaller so that we could accommodate for more text. But in fact, the amount of text should be quite concise. So you have the luxury of using a larger image. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I had a quick question, Cece.
Yeah.
For some of those digest emails, I know some people send out, emails with a lot of lists of things. So you've got, we've got all of these things coming up, or like all of the things under camps, or all of the different XYZ, and they're trying to sort of drive people less to articles and more to a bunch of different either homepages or resources or that sort of thing. What are your recommendations for those types of emails? And do you still recommend transitioning them to only having maybe 3 to 5 different things?
Okay, that's a really good question, Joe. So if you are an organization that has a lot of different things going on, and you have an identified group of people who want to know about all of those different things, by all means, send them the information that they are going to want. Send them, if all of that is compelling and relevant to them, by all means, send them a list of upcoming events that are linked over to the appropriate landing pages. However, I would still recommend limiting the number of those events and also tailoring them to the interests of those people. Sure, you may have a cohort of people that really do want to know absolutely everything that is going on. However, there may be some people who, let's say you're an arts center, right? And you have exhibitions and then you have classes. You probably have a group of people who really just want to know about the classes because they've demonstrated that they attend a lot of classes. When you look at your past email history, they tend to only click on links regarding classes. So you can even segment that a little bit to say, okay, this is my group that gets classes only. This is my group that gets exhibitions only. And then you can tag based on interest. So let's say you've got a class that's related to an exhibition. When you're sending that digest email about classes out, you can certainly tag and say, hey, if you're interested in this class, this exhibition actually has this type of art that you would create in the class on view. So there's still a little bit of segmentation that needs to happen there in terms of what is on that big list that you're sending them. If you are simply just sending out a list, I would still try to make sure that it's not a never-ending list of like 30 things, right? Try to call that down a little bit to maybe if you're dealing with a list of 30 things, maybe the 10 most sort of important things, and then have a call to action button that says, click here to see the full list of things that are going on. This is important too, because you can use that click data to help you segment. We talked about this last time. You can use who is clicking on what to determine what you're going to send to them next time. So if you've got someone who's continually clicking on that I want to see everything button, you can probably lump them into that bucket of people who want to see everything. That was a long-winded answer to that. I hope that made sense.
No problem.
Okay. I'm on some cold medicine here, folks.
I've got more questions to fill airtime. Don't you worry. But anybody else got anything?
Good. Don't be shy. Captain Picard says, don't be shy.
I think something else that I'm just interested in is, we talked a lot about, placement of text, calls to action, having a clear button, making sure your image is at the top and it's captivating, making sure that you're not using big thumbnails, a lot of these sort of best practices. Can you talk a little bit about some of the most often seen worst practices? What are the things, what are your pet peeves? What do you think is keeping people from success? What is annoying their constituents? What is really, problematic that you see that is something people might be able to quickly address or at least consider I wonder why that's such a problem for CC. I like that, or et cetera.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, and it doesn't necessarily have something to do about design, but is my number one email pet peeve. Every time I see it happen, it literally kills a part of my soul. And that is sending the same email out to your entire list. That's not going to help you. That's holding you back. And that's what's keeping your open rates low. So there should be no one email that goes out to your entire list. Regarding design, one of the things I see all the time is just too much text. Paragraphs of text, of body text, and no sort of organization or hierarchy of the text. As we saw with the F pattern, making sure that it's not too much text, that we're using headings to help guide the eye down the email, keeping that text concise so that people click over. This is what we want to be doing. We don't want to be having complete articles in any email. And also, that includes things like fundraising communications. Because even if you're on the marketing side, odds are you're probably sending out some communications for the development side of your organization. containing complete letters from the executive director in an email, right? That falls in the same category of just having too much text. Give people just enough text so that they'll click over. Also, another pet peeve is emails where the text is on a black background. Please do not put your text on a black background in an email. Even if that is what your website is and you're not able to change your website at this exact moment in time, let the email have the main text on a white background and maybe put that black sides. Remember, there was that example with the orange in the Oberlin Center for the Arts email. Maybe that's where you put that black to make it look on brand. But please do not have your text on a black background. I just spoke at a conference yesterday in Delaware, and we talked about email a lot. And I had two people come up afterwards to show me the last emails that they sent out. They showed them to me on their phone because they wanted to know if they were okay. And after I had just gotten done ranting on how your text needs to be on a white background, their text was on a black background. And they were like, oh, I know you said not to put text on a black background, but this is okay, right? As if there's an exception. There is no exception.
Why?
Please put it on a white background.
Why?
Because no matter what your text is, having it on a black background, it's still going to be harder to read than on white. Period. And it's probably not going to meet accessibility standards.
And I think that's really important because it can look really slick, but if people can't read it as easily, if you can't skim it as easily, if you're not able to process the information, you're like, ooh, that's a beautiful design, but if I didn't get the information, it didn't help.
Exactly. With email, simple is always better. Don't try to do anything uber fancy because you know, number one, you know that it's going to be viewed on a mobile device, most likely, right?
Yep.
And you just want to have it be very simple. So exactly what you said, Joe, so that people can easily read it. They can easily skim it. Oh my gosh, I have another pet peeve. When people put an image in the email and the whole email is one image. Please don't do that. If you do that, please stop immediately. There's a number of reasons for this. Number one, it's some people don't always have their images enabled in their email. There is still that occurs, right? Most people do, but that still does happen. The second thing is it takes a certain amount of time and bandwidth for an image to load in an email. Think about when you're on your phone and you're checking your email and you're somewhere, you're either on a shoddy internet connection or you've got like 2 bars. It may take forever for that image to load. In fact, it may not even load on that device because it's just too much. The other reasons is when you do that as one image, you only have the chance for one link. So you can't provide additional links to other copy. You can't have that very clear separate CTA button. And if you're using one image for the email, odds are it's heavily designed, which is sort of the antithesis of keeping things simple. And you want to keep things as simple as possible. You want to make it as easy to read as possible. So having an email with just one image is definitely not a best practice. We tend to do these with things like an invitation to an event, right? Our graphic designer made this very pretty invitation. We ask them to send us a JPEG of it and we slap it in an email, right? Also, for accessibility standards, a screen reader cannot read text that is in an image. So
additionally, this is also my pet peeve, so I'm just going to jump in.
Go ahead.
It's not mobile responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And so it looks beautiful on your screen. It might even look beautiful on your tablet.
Yep.
My aunt still has an iPhone 5. I guarantee you it does not look beautiful on her iPhone 5.
Yep. An image will not be responsive.
Makes me crazy. The other thing I want to just circle back to that we talked about earlier, when you were saying one of your pet peeves is sending the same email to everyone.
Yeah.
Literally, just changing the salutation, just changing the way you're talking to the person. It can be the exact same body, but do you really want to talk to somebody who's giving you $20,000 the same way you're talking to somebody who bought one ticket from you? Probably not. And we used to, at a place I used to work, we would put together one giant kind of email as if we were sending it to everyone. And then we would replicate that email multiple times and then just delete all of the content blocks that weren't applicable to the segment we were sending it to and send it that way. So you're like, oh, I'm sending this to people who are interested in dance. I don't need to include the theater. That can just be a button that says, if you're interested in theater, click here.
Right.
And so, you don't, it doesn't have to be a huge time suck to do that kind of segmentation, but that extra 15 to 20 minutes of just like, okay, how am I talking to different groups of people? How am I standardizing this so that people are getting a slightly modified version that is more special, more unique, will increase your click rate, will increase your open rate. Changing the subject line for different people, even if it's the same content. Like, don't send the same email to everyone. Agreed.
Yep. Yes. And that's an excellent tactic. Sure that everybody has to, oh wait.
Sorry, I muted you accidentally.
That's okay. That's an excellent tactic for people to try because I'd be willing to bet that everyone in this webinar has to have the emails approved by someone before they go out. So by just making all of the content right away, everything is approved, and then you can just go ahead and delete whatever needs to be deleted or add whatever needs to be added for any particular segment. It's a time saver.
For sure. Yeah, Rick, what's up?
Hi, Joe. Hi, Cece.
Hi, Rick.
I have kind of a related question that will draw on your opera background.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily email, but it has to do with visual. So, we're a choral group. We do a lot of foreign language texts.
Sure.
And we generally sing in venues that in one way or another allow us to do super titles, which we make simply using a slide progression in PowerPoint.
Yep.
Those super titles have evolved, but now they are a black background with white text. The text is 150 point Arial. So there's no, it's a sans serif font, so there's no loops or fanciness about it. What would be your opinion? Would it be better to reverse that? Just visual?
Yeah, no, super titles are a totally different thing. No,
sure, of course. It's not email.
The super titles need to be white because that's huge white text. And because the theater is dark, obviously that white text is really going to pop. So no, don't change how you're doing super titles.
Right. I have one other question, which is, can you give us again the name of that statute that it had an acronym for a name?
Oh, for accessibility?
Right.
Right, yeah, it's WCAG. And right now, it's Web Accessibility something guidelines.
And that's for low vision individuals.
Exactly, it's for people who are vision impaired. And this standard, like I mentioned, this is becoming the standard and for websites as well. So anybody on the call, if you are in the process of having a new website built, or if you are thinking of having a new website built, sending out RFPs, make sure that you have in the RFP or that you're discussing with your developers, how are they making compliant with these standards? Just because a lawsuit hasn't been brought against a choir or a theater or an opera company yet, that doesn't mean that is not coming down the pike. And like I mentioned, there has already been a lot of talk about how, the NEA and other granting organizations that are parts of national, state, and local governments are going to start requiring this. So if you want to get grants or keep your grant money, you will have to have this in place.
Well, I would think AHCMC is probably not far behind.
Mm.
We don't have any plans at the moment, but we do like to keep up with best practices.
Yeah, you're probably not far behind.
I think something else that I want to just say for everybody, if you're noticing through this progression, a lot of this stuff is going to be easier to implement when you're thinking about your annual marketing plan if you're trying to flip everything. So yes, right now you should be thinking about how you're segmenting, what's going on, who you're sending emails to. Yes, right now if you have an email with 30 different links, or you're sending out something that you're calling a newsletter that has a ton of different things. And I mean, I know I'm thinking about it specifically about the Culture Spotlight and a few other things that we do here, and news and views and jobs and ops and all kinds of stuff. But I know that a lot of the times we send out emails that have all that information because we're so pressed for time. But one of the reasons we're pressed for time is that we're always trying to sell more tickets. We're always trying to increase donations. We're always trying to get more capital. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is this more targeted approach and this idea that I'll actually end up sending less emails if the first one I sent gives me the results that I want. So when you're approaching this, it can seem a little bit like overwhelming to be, oh, I have to have all of these segments. I have to have a new tactic. I have to, make sure I'm not sending it to my entire list. But there are these ways where you can get everything approved and then just delete out to segment. There are these ways that you can say, who are my most engaged or most easy to sell to people, and how can I get that sale, move them off my list, and then move down the funnel to the next set of people so that I'm not focusing on sending those people things anymore. Simply just as we talked about in the first one, taking out the people who have already participated in whatever you're trying to send something out to will keep them more engaged because they're not going to think that any of the emails that you send them aren't important. We're always trying to increase our equity. We're always trying to increase, and when I say equity, I mean brand equity. I mean that in terms of investment, not in terms of DEI. We're always trying to make it so that we are a priority for the people we're communicating with. And so this is what CC has been taking us through. This is how we're getting to where we're going, is people thinking, oh, XYZ organization sent me an email. There's going to be something I want to read inside, not, oh, that's just that thing that I sometimes skim, etc. And so trying to figure that out is something I grapple with all the time, but it's something that I think these trainings are important for, and when you put it into context, can really help.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left. Are there any other questions?
I think I want to say something.
Sure.
I think you brought up a good point about feeling overwhelmed. And between what we talked about on the last webinar, this webinar, and then the one that's forthcoming, a good approach is maybe trying to implement, one thing and trying it out. Think of the thing that, Joe, you mentioned, creating the large email and then deleting out to do the segmentations. If you feel that that is going to be something that you can accomplish in your organization in the short term, then let that be the thing that you try, right? Or maybe the thing that you try first is, instead of sending your email newsletter to everyone, that you look at that 25% who actually do open it, you only send it to them, and then you send something else to the others and look at that data.
Yeah, and I think that if you are trying something like that and you have some reservations, there's no problem if in the targeted emails you're sending, you have a little button that says, want to stay even more informed? Click here. And it sends them to a simple, MailChimp, Constant Contact, WordFly, whatever, sign up list that says, receive our monthly digest, or receive our monthly news email. You know, if people want it, make it easy for them to opt in, and you can do it that way so that you're, again, only sending people who want the information. Sending emails to people that they don't open, or sending emails to people that they open and don't click on anything, don't actually go and convert and do any of the actions that you want, isn't helpful.
Exactly.
The other thing that I would say for me is the next webinar on automation will also help you to feel a little bit less overwhelmed, because you can make a lot of your email clients do a lot of work for you. You can set things up and then have things happen. So stay tuned for that. Rick, I see your hand. Before we go there, I just want to quickly ask, does anybody else have a question before we close out with Rick and Cece? Once, twice, sold, Rick. Oh.
There I am. Okay. If anybody else has a question, please feel free to interrupt. Cece, I'm wondering if at some point, maybe now at the end of the seminar, at the end of the webinar is not the time, if you could maybe discuss in an overall brief way an annual digital marketing email plan. I have none. I just kind of do my emails when I think, oh, they haven't had an email from us in a while. Maybe it's time to send them something. Or if we have a concert or something like that, you know, I want to support that. But it's never been part of a plan. And it occurs to me there might be a real advantage, especially time savings, if you have a plan and then you just tick off things on the plan as you go through the year.
Well, certainly. And Joe mentioned just a couple of minutes ago about when you're doing your marketing plan for the upcoming year, or however if you do it quarterly, whatever that is, making sure that email is integrated into that. The easiest way to do it is, I'm sure everybody here is managing their advertising and communications in some sort of spreadsheet or calendar type software, just making sure that you're adding in the emails to whatever that is, so that you know what email should go out and when. In the last webinar, we talked about your marketing ecosystem. We talked about all your different channels and how they all reinforce each other. So, you've got other things running for a particular concert. You're going to want to reiterate that messaging in email. So just making sure that you're not forgetting about it when you're planning your other communications, and making sure that it's written down somewhere so that you have a guide.
The other thing too that I can say is that I still have, I think, all of the information from the digital marketing bootcamp that CC did for us in 2017.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to send that to you, Rick, and I'll just go ahead and send the link out to everybody when I send this out.
Great.
But there's some great information in there, and some good ideas for sort of like how to plan your season and that sort of thing. But I think too, I mean, I've gotten a lot of good stuff just from Googling, like annual digital marketing plan, annual email plan. A lot of people have, spreadsheets and Airtables and different things that you can just download that tell you, like, what am I doing for this, and this plugin, these events. Make sure you have at least 3 things a year that are institutional branding. My little plug, it's my personal pet peeve. Don't always sell stuff.
Yeah.
Like, people totally forget to do institutional marketing. If somebody who works with your company gets an award, if you guys if you have some sort of a success, if you're just excited that, you've had an amazing performance from one of your camps and your 4th graders did an incredible job, or you were able to work with an incredible artist. I love getting an email that's just a thank you, sending stuff out that was like, last night was incredible. We sold out for XYZ and had an amazing time. And we're just so elated that, this Broadway star came to us, or this local band was able to bring all of their people to us, right? And there's no call to action, but it was this sort of like, I wanted to keep you in the loop, but it's not a newsletter. Sometimes the stuff you send out in your newsletter, one of those things can be a really good institutional marketing email. And those institutional marketing emails can be really good for brand equity and can make people feel like they're more connected with your organization and that they're more engaged with an organization that shares their values.
Yeah.
So I think having those as part of your email marketing plan is also really good.
Yeah.
That brings us to
also
11. So if any of you have any burning questions, when I send out the recording from this webinar as well as the recording from the first one, they'll both be coming out. I will include CC's email. Her stuff is her phone number, or is that your phone number or Forum's phone number that's up right now?
Forum's phone number.
Yeah, Forum's phone number is there. And so just feel free to contact Forum if you are looking for somebody to do some consulting, and feel free to reach out to CC if you have any additional questions. She's always great about doing what she can. Anything else from you, Ms. Dadisman?
I think I'm good. I'm gonna go have a couple of Ricola cough drops and some tea now.
Rest your voice. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day and week.
Thank you.